Good morning. I'd like to look at John chapter 10 this morning, the reason being that we've left Watchtower and we're wondering where can we find the truth. Now the context to John chapter 10 is that Jesus had just cured the man who had been born blind, and a huge controversy had arisen because Jesus cured the man on the Sabbath. The scribes and Pharisees were calling Jesus a sinner. So the question arose, who was right, the scribes and Pharisees or Jesus? Now Jesus could easily have given us a long list of where the scribes and Pharisees had gone wrong, but instead, in this instance, he gave us a way to be able to tell the difference between true and false teachers. And he talks about a shepherd with his sheep. And in John chapter 10 and verse 3, he said, "The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them. The sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." Now, Ellicott's commentary notes that there's a little difference between verses 3 and 4. Verse 4 seems to be a little more strong. In verse 3, the sheep hear his voice, and the shepherd calls his sheep. Now, verse 4 talks about the shepherd bringing all his own out, all of them, one by one. And the sheep follow him because they not only hear his voice, but by this time, they know his voice. So how do we get to know the voice of the shepherd? Well, I'll tell you what helped me. After Watchtower, I read the Gospels through quickly, and I formed a picture that was very different from the one Watchtower was giving me. The emphasis was different. It was more upon how we lived than the preaching work. The preaching work was important, of course, but we had to get the foundation correct. Once we have the foundation correctly, once we know all the scriptures reasonably well, then we know the voice of the shepherd and we've got the whole picture. It's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You buy a puzzle and you look at the picture on the front and then you try to fit the pieces into where they fit into the picture. And we need to do that with the scriptures. The scribes and Pharisees didn't. They didn't look at the whole picture of the law of Moses. Instead, they looked at the pieces and made a different picture out of the pieces. They forgot that the whole picture was love, justice, mercy, faithfulness, how much the Lord loved them. But they turned it into a book of rules, nitpicking rules. So they got the whole thing wrong. Maybe I can give an example here. John 10 and verse 16, where Jesus said, "I have other sheep that are not of this fold," and he was going to bring them and make them one flock, one shepherd. Now, if we look at the whole picture, Jesus in the first century, his priority was to gather the heirs of the kingdom. The Jews were not faithful enough, so there were very few in number who were following Jesus. So he turned to the Gentiles to fill the number of kingdom heirs. And if we look at Ephesians chapter 2, we'll be able to see the voice of the shepherd here. The Apostle Paul was talking to the Gentiles, the Ephesians, and he said to them, chapter 2 and verse 12, "Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope, without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, he who made us both one." So that's two, the Jews and the Gentiles. Jesus has made them one and broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. And Paul goes on to explain that that's the law of Moses. So in order to fit these pieces into the whole picture, we know that these ones were the first fruits that Jesus brought from the earth. We also know that our dear Father is going to spread his protective tent over the whole earth, so that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thus, we do not individually follow the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses or anybody else, but we follow individually the voice of the shepherd. We stand on our own feet, but we don't want to be nitpickers. We need friends. We need those that we can discuss the scriptures with, and we might lose the odd piece of the puzzle, it might fall under the carpet or something, but generally we encourage each other to have the voice of the shepherd, which gives us the whole picture. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.